You cannot kill the truth, you cannot kill justice, you cannot kill what the people are fighting for. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today revolves around two important subjects. One is the country's human rights track record, as well as the danger of the proposed Bureau of Rehabilitation bill. Joining us this evening on the show are Mr. Upul Jayasuriya, President's Counsel, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka; Bhavani Fonseca, Attorney and Senior Researcher, Centre for Policy Alternatives; Ambika Satkuranathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka; as well as Dr. Mahe Mendis, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka as well. Let's get the ball rolling with Mr. Upul Jayasuriya, President's Counsel, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Now, Mr. Jayasuriya, interestingly, I want to drag your attention to the statement that was made by the Human Rights High Commissioner in Geneva on the 6th of September. She speaks about impunity for human rights abuses and economic crimes, and corruption in Sri Lanka was the underlying reason for the collapse in the island nation. Now, this is the first time economic crimes have been connected to the human rights track record of a particular country in question, and in particular Sri Lanka. How do you view the statement that was made by the Human Rights High Commissioner on the 6th of September, a few weeks ago from now?
Thank you for having me on the show. As identified by the Human Rights Commissioner, Sri Lanka has caught the attention of the entire world, not for the best of reasons. That's mainly due to the fact that the country has collapsed. Our economy has collapsed, and the inflation rate that was in single digit had now not only entered double digits. Now the food inflation, today's papers report that it has now risen up to 94%. 94%. We are having a situation where we are still celebrating the Children's Day, the World Children's Day, 2 days back, but we are not aware, or we should be aware, that there are millions of children in this country are starving because of the economy that we are now facing, that we are going through the phase. And also, that's not for a fault or a crime that they have committed, or not even their parents for that matter. That's all a crime that is committed by the rulers, and also those who are vested with the power to manage the economy of this country, namely the Monetary Board of Sri Lanka, the two ministers of finance, one of them were also the minister of the Prime Minister, and several members of the Monetary Board, and the entire cabinet of ministers. What did we do? As we started the present government regime, when the President Rajapaksa came into power in 2019, what did his election manifesto say? He was like a Santa Claus. He gave away 681 billion rupees as tax cuts. He gave it as election promise, and then he put it through his cabinet once he got elected. And then before the laws were passed after the elections, they issued circulars to the Treasury not to charge these taxes, running up to about nearly 10 types of taxes, as a result of which we have lost 49%. 49%. Now, this is a central bank report. I'm quoting from there. 49% of the tax revenue was lost with this one move of theirs. So there has to be somebody accountable for it. Somebody has to be responsible for it. Somebody has to be dealt with for it. Now, it is not only the members of the Monetary Board. The Monetary Board, as we all know, is an independent body. Nobody can dictate terms to the Monetary Board. There are members, two members appointed by the minister concerned, I think the president who has to appoint them, and then there is a Treasury Secretary, the governor is appointed, and these people have taken this decision, and they have to, then they are supposed to be versatile in economics, and they should be economists, but the people who were appointed, they were taking decisions. Now, when they were taking decisions, they have been coerced or even influenced by people who had no power to do so. For instance, P.B. Jayasundara, President's Secretary, had no status quo at all to influence the decision of the monetary board. He was writing letters. He wrote letters which are now in public domain. It has been brought up in the Supreme Court in a matter against the central bank. He wrote and then said, central bank took two decisions. Dr. Lakshman's monetary board took two decisions. One was as empowered under section 103 of the monetary law. They are empowered to fix the LC margin for imports. So in order to cut down or discourage the imports of the country, and they increase the LC margin on selected items, about 600 items, to 150%. So idea was when you put in 150% margin, there will be more cost to the imported item.
So that, Mr. Jayasuriya, it's very clear that fingers are being pointed at a lot of individuals, but we saw the manner in which how the former governor of the central bank, the treasury secretary, as well as the secretary to the president are being directly connected with economic crimes in Sri Lanka. It's very clear. Why isn't accountability taken against these individuals, or at least legal action taken against these individuals concerned? Because at the end of the day, accountability has to be somewhere.
One might think that there are no laws to deal with this kind of situation. No, I disagree with that. There is, at the moment, there is a petition that has been submitted to the Bribery Commission to deal with these people who are responsible for that. This is corruption. Under section 70 of the Bribery and Corruption Law, whatever the act that you commit and it suffers a loss to a person or a government or any other party, then that is an act of corruption. So, but the Bribery Commission send letters to the people who, first they sent a letter saying that we have accepted your complaint and we are going to investigate it. Then second letter was sent to the complainant. Dr. Mahim Mendy is one of those complainants. They were told that, look, come and make a statement. When they went to make the statement, they are asking what is the law under which you are making the complaint. And these are sad state of affairs. This very sad state of affairs. They should understand, if they have written a letter and they said we are going to investigate this matter, then they should know what is the offence committed. They can ask a layman as to what the legal backing on this is. So what I was trying to say was, when this kind of influence is being made by people other than the people who are empowered to do that, right. The only person who can talk to the monetary board is the governor, the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance. But that again he must give by a directive. He has not given a directive, and when he gives a directive to do whatever that he wants them to do it, he must absolve the monetary board of the responsibility that may flow from the decision that he wants the monetary board to take.
Responsibility at the end of the day has to be directed at someone, Mr. Jayasuriya. We speak about this over and over again. We saw the manner in which how the Aragale also transformed into a situation where they were demanding that accountability has to lie somewhere. But you are a very learned lawyer. You are the President's Counsel. You are the former chairman of the Bar Association as well. Now you know what needs to be done. But individuals of your caliber, when you all are not taking actions, can the people be blamed for it?
That's not right. I have taken action. There is this petition that has been submitted and filed before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has taken the matter very seriously. This matter has been argued for the last 9 days before a bench of 5 judges, and today was the last day, and the order has been reserved. And this is an action that has been made to the Supreme Court, bringing all these matters to the attention of the Supreme Court. Well, there will be order made.
So are you trying to tell me that there is going to be light end of the tunnel as far as these these economic crimes are concerned in Sri Lanka? There will be some light that we'll see end of this dark tunnel or this dark chapter that we're going through. And what the Aragale
there ought to be. That is what
demanded.
The young men and women at the Aragale, that's what they were asking for. They didn't just do it for nothing. Whatever they have done, we have achieved some results. They have achieved some results, and we as lawyers also supported them unhesitantly. Unreservedly we supported them. If not for the legal support that they got, this wouldn't have gone so far.
So this issue will not be swept under the carpet like the other issues that we've seen over the last few years.
Maybe there are certain groups, like even the business community may want to forget the past and bury the hatchet and move forward, but not the legal fraternity. Not the legal fraternity. They have been at the forefront. They will continue to be at the forefront, and they are fighting out this battle wholeheartedly at no cost to the parties concerned, at no cost to the parties concerned.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Pul President's Council, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Mr. Jayasuri, for joining us. Later on in the show, we'll have more questions directed at you with regard to the human rights track record of the country, as well as the proposed Bureau of Rehabilitation bill. I now move my attention to Bhavani Fonseca, attorney at law and senior researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives. Bhavani, interestingly, a few months ago, we saw a progressive statement being made by Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ali Sabri, saying the PTA is going to be replaced. However, look at the last few weeks, what has transpired in Sri Lanka. A complete U-turn on the declaration of the high security zones. B, we saw the manner in which how public servants have been told by the government officials that they cannot criticize the government on social media platforms. C, now we're talking about the Bureau of the Rehabilitation Bill. What is going on right now in the country?
Well, Shamir, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a timely discussion in terms of the human rights track record, considering that Sri Lanka is before the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and there is going to be a vote on Thursday or Friday this week. So we'll have to see what happens there, but it's also an indictment in terms of what's happened in the last couple of months. This is also in the backdrop of, as the previous speaker said, we've had massive protests, people came to the streets, and there's been change to some extent in the sense of a regime change. But we also have the government making various statements, making particular policy decisions. So you mentioned the high security zone as being an example. I mean, we issued a statement. Not just a U-turn, a complete disaster, I would say. You know, you establish high security zones under a law which is on Official Secrets Act. Now, you really ask the question, what is the secret in this high security zone? High security zones have been created in the past during the war, and that was for particular security reasons as claimed by the then government. Now, we've been in court on some of these matters, and there's been some success where people have been able to go back to their land. So I want to keep that also in terms of the past, the history of high security zones. What happened in Sri Lanka in the last couple of weeks is that they created this high security zone using a very questionable law on official secrets. And then when questions were raised, many of us raised these questions, the government suddenly came out and said over the weekend that they're going to revoke this high security zone, the gazette. The question should be asked is, why did they impose it in the first place? What is the thinking? Who is behind it? Now, the President as Minister for Defense signed that declaration, but I think there has to be the question as to what drove the Minister of Defense to do such things. Who is driving such policies in this government? Who's driving these policies in a situation where there is such a focus on the human rights track record? But it shouldn't be a question that we ask just during the Human Rights Council sessions. This is a question that's relevant at all times. So I think the high security zone is one. The Bureau of Rehabilitation that's before now, it's being challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is hearing these submissions today and tomorrow, so we'll have to see what the Supreme Court says. But that's also raises question is, what is the thinking of this government? This is also in a context where there was a regulation issued last year under the PTA on de-radicalization, and there is a stay order by the Supreme Court, again a matter which we went to court on. And in light of a stay order, the question is, are they now trying to bring in this law to replace the scheme and objective of those regulations? So what is again the thinking of this government in terms of rehabilitation? You also mentioned the whole thing about a ban on statements made by public servants. Again, isn't this going to the heart of freedom of expression, freedom of speech of public servants? Now, this is all done at a time where Sri Lanka saw an exceptional situation where people came to the streets calling for system change, calling for a change in political culture. And we are now going back to the old tricks, the old policies, the transparency is questionable with all of these things. Who is accountable? What is the objective? Isn't it repression in different ways the government is trying to do? So, you know, lots of things I think we need to look at, but this is also at a time where the government internationally is saying that they're doing their best, give them more time, and then you see very questionable policies and practices on the ground.
Bhavani, many people are viewing the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration right now, bearing the hallmarks of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration when it comes to gazette notifications being issued and complete U-turns being taken as well. But in your opinion, when we have a vote that is due on Thursday, early Friday morning in Sri Lanka, in Geneva, with regard to Sri Lanka, why is it that the government is hell-bent with regard to tightening the human rights track record more in the country?
So I think it goes back to who are the decision makers. So we may have a new government, we may have a new president, but I think the decision makers haven't changed. Those who were there last year or the previous year, who pushed through task forces, who are very hell-bent on emergency regulations, who are hell-bent on regulations under the PTA. You know, that culture remains, the impunity remains. And the question of, has there been accountability or reckoning, real reckoning for what has happened in the past, during the war, post-war, and there hasn't been. We have really seen a situation where alleged perpetrators are in key decision-making positions, driving policy, and I suspect some of the things we're seeing now is driven by some of these particular same individuals. So if there's no change...
Like who, Bhavani?
Well, if you look at those who are driving the defense establishment, they were there in the previous government. Those who are driving the law and order situation, they were in the previous government. And I asked the question, has anyone faced accountability for alleged violations during the war, post-war, or even more recently? There's been cases against attacks against protesters. We made a complaint to the IGP and the Attorney General in May related to the violence on the 9th of May when there was sufficient evidence to investigate. Has anyone been held accountable? I don't think so. So the individuals making decisions, driving policy, implementing policy are the same. We may have some faces that are relatively new, and I say relatively because I think it's the same, but key decision makers are still in very powerful positions. And it goes to the crux of the matter. There is impunity in Sri Lanka. So the whole issue you raised before about economic crimes being connected to human rights violations of the past, quite telling in terms of the country that says they're going to do so much, but hasn't really delivered for the people.
But what I don't understand is, Bhavani, we are now going to the international community with a begging bowl for funds. We are in a dilemma. We are in a crisis at this very juncture in the country. There is no question about that. Why are we still venturing into a path that the international community may distance Sri Lanka? And this may result in even aid coming to Sri Lanka being reduced in the next few months, next few years.
I agree.
This will have a drastic impact on the country's economy.
Yeah, and considering the economic crisis, we really need to get our house on in order to ensure there is confidence among the international community that they can work with a government that respects human rights, upholds the rule of law, adheres to democratic principles. That's not what we are seeing. So it's really quite questionable as to which direction this government is taking.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives. I now move my attention to Ambika Satkaranathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Before talking about the Rehabilitation Bureau Bill, Ambika, let me talk to you about the buzzwords when it comes to the world right now. We speak about violent extremism, we speak about radicalization, we talk about de-radicalization. These are the major issues that concerns not only Sri Lanka but the world as well. In this context, how do you view these words in the context of Sri Lanka at this very moment of time?
Well, as you rightly said, those are buzzwords, and they're also buzzwords because even at the UN, at the Security Council, for instance, there is a counterterrorism architecture. And that counterterrorism architecture is driven by member states. Member states like to use these terms because these terms have no legal definition, certainly not in international human rights law. And they use these terms because it allows them to draft laws that are very broad, that they don't have to make any decisions based on objective criteria. It is subjective, and it allows them to curtail human rights. This has happened, not just in Sri Lanka, it's a global problem. So at the Security Council, there are various counterterrorism mechanisms that produce what we call soft law in international law. They're not conventions. They can be guidelines, they can be things like that. What member states, countries do is they use these to justify whatever repressive laws that they might formulate. So what happened here was that under PTA, they issued what were called the de-radicalization regulations. Now, the problem here is it's very easy to term everything extremist, right, and radical. What is radical? Radical doesn't necessarily mean that it is criminal, that it is harmful, etc., right? And also when they say how are people radicalized? When you look at research internationally, what it shows is that it is not also often religious ideology, for example, that radicalizes them. It is young people who live in societies where they feel marginalized, where there is discrimination, where there is violence by the state. They feel also very isolated. There are no support mechanisms, and then they turn to this. And there is a lot of that even on the internet, where people are recruited, for instance, and they under the cover of religion, but it's not really. It is use of violence by using religious ideology as cover. So what governments do, and what Sri Lanka is also doing now, they called the people who protested, the Aragale, they call them terrorists, right? That was done even by a minister, I think, a few weeks ago. So that is very easy. You label me a terrorist, label you a terrorist, label the Aragale people a terrorist. That means you can use the de-radicalization regulations, you can use the PTA, and if they pass this bill, they can send all of us to compulsory rehabilitation.
So let me get into the nuts and bolts of the matter that we're discussing today. The Rehabilitation Bureau bill. When you look at the bill itself, the objective of the Bureau, in terms of the definition that has been articulated in the bill in question, the objective of the Bureau shall be to rehabilitate drug-dependent persons, ex-combatants, members of violent extremist groups, and any other group of persons who require treatments and rehabilitation by adopting various therapies in order to ensure effective reintegration and reconciliation through developing socio-economic standards. Now, does this in any way mean, Ambika, that those who engaged in the Aragale a few months back are at risk?
Yes, of course, because it says or any other group of persons. And violent extremism is also not defined. In our country, even terrorism is not defined, which is why they can abuse the PTA. So if they do pass this, there is definitely a danger of those persons being targeted and sent for quote-unquote rehabilitation. The other question, why do they have former combatants? It's been 13 years, and particularly the Mahinda Rajapaksa government and even Gotabaya Rajapaksa have very proudly said that they rehabilitated 12,000 persons. Now, mind you, even that was not according to international human rights standards. So what I'm trying to say is that this is not something new. It's part of a continuum. They started with the rehabilitation of alleged former combatants. Those centers were then turned into drug rehab centers in 2013. There are violations taking place, recorded, and then they tried to bring in the de-radicalization regulations, and now they brought these three different regimes under one roof in the the Bureau of Rehabilitation bill. So it is an ecosystem, and they have constructed it one brick by brick.
No, but according to the bill, Ambika, it's very clear that when you read the functions and the powers of the Bureau itself, it's very clear that it is to enhance the employability of persons undergoing treatments and rehabilitation, so on and so forth. So don't you think in any way that this will help persons who are dependent on drug members of extremist groups instead of being held in prison for a prolonged period of time?
Good question, because that is exactly what the government is going to say. I would say let's take drug-dependent persons. Compulsory drug rehabilitation or treatment does not work. And this is proved by evidence in Sri Lanka as well as outside the country. Other studies have said. Plus, it's also a violation of human rights standards. Sri Lanka still has compulsory drug rehab. What you need is a health and human rights-based approach for voluntary rehab. That is the way you help these people, reintegrate
But isn't
them.
this a step forward?
Well, we have currently several compulsory drug rehab centers, two of which are run by the military. And there, people are sent for compulsory rehab where they're subjected to daily violence. This also has been recorded. I published a report last year after interviewing several people who went to these centers. So that is what currently exists. When our system is so dysfunctional and abusive, and you use terms like violent extremism, or you can rehabilitate any other person, what it means is that it gives the state license to rehabilitate under the guise of rehabilitation, crack down on dissent, arbitrarily detain anyone they want.
Okay. So we'll get back to all this in a moment, because it's quite interesting to learn about the bill itself. Let me now focus my attention on Dr. Mahim Mendes, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. Dr. Mendes, we're talking about rehabilitation. We're talking about a rehabilitation bill. We're talking about even those who are involved in the Aragalaya being at risk right now with regard to this particular bill that has been now in contention in the Supreme Court. But don't you think, Dr. Mendes, you've been very vocal on this over the last few years, last few months as well. Don't you think rehabilitation begins with the 225 members of parliament? Isn't that the right way to move forward as far as Sri Lanka is concerned? Look at those 225. Look at what happened in the recent past. We saw when the Federal government was in power. Look at the way that the parliamentarians behaved. So don't you think rehabilitation should begin from there and not with the people who were engaged with the Aragalaya?
That is absolutely right. It's all to do with credibility. Who are these people who are talking about rehabilitation for people in the uprising? What moral right have they got to question people, to put people in the uprising into this miserable situation because they did the right thing? On behalf of the people, those university students, other youth, civil society groups, the people of this country had every reason to question the conduct of those who are mandated to rule. The social contract between the people and the government had been violated. If the people do not raise questions, well, what will happen to this country? As you rightly say, the people who are bringing legislation of this nature have absolutely, I would say, as I said earlier, they have no credibility. And this government, led by Mr. Wickremesinghe, has absolutely no right to even think about this, because he has basically robbed political power. He is a man totally rejected in every single electorate in this country, in 25 districts in 9 provinces. Such a person should not be even thinking about legislation of this nature. He has undermined the system, the democratic system, the democratic processes, the culture of democracy have been undermined. They can call his regime constitutionally right and lawful, but this is an immoral, unethical regime which has absolutely no moral right to hold power.
So, Dr. Mendes, we've heard this rhetoric over and over again, but when you look at these bills that are being brought into the public domain by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Reforms, it's very clear that usually in the right context, usually these laws are brought in to ensure and ensure that it's brought in for the good of the people, the good of the citizens of the country, and that's how the parliament enacts laws, not regressive laws that needs to be passed just to make sure that a certain group of people are isolated and taken into custody or put into rehabilitation, and so on and so forth. So if you look at all these laws that are being brought in during the recent past, what is your take with regard to the government's track record on human rights? Do you think that the government is on the right track as far as human rights are concerned?
How can the government be on the right track? As you rightly said, laws should be brought for the common good of the people. These laws are brought with a malicious intention to undermine the people, the very people who have mandated them to rule. Having failed to fulfill the promises given to them, they now brutally, violently suppress using intimidatory tactics against the people. So, as I rightly said, as I said earlier, they have absolutely no credibility. There is no way that this regime can even think of the type of actions that they pursue right now. They have no moral right. So the people are continuously provoked. And what this will lead to will be like a volcanic eruption.
So Dr. Mendes, just a few days ago, I was watching Newsfirst and I saw a very prominent politician of the Sri Lanka Pojana Peramuna, that is the young Namal Rajapaksa, making a statement articulating how important it is to enroll those who have engaged in the Aragalaya to the social stratas in the island nation. And I'm trying to figure out what probably would have been running on the mindset of the young Namal Rajapaksa when he made that statement, saying those who were engaged in the Aragalaya, who were extremists who were engaged in the Aragalaya, should be brought and enrolled back to society.
Of course, you should be asking this question from
I wish I could ask him that question,
but it is self-righteous,
unfortunately,
total arrogance on the part of someone who has absolutely no credibility. The people despise the Rajapaksas for all what they have done, and his response is to make the government even a greater mockery by insulting the people, insulting the youth of the land. If he considers himself a young politician, he should have been more careful the type of utterances he made in a self-righteous, arrogant manner. The people surely will teach this regime a lesson.
He doesn't have to look far, no, Dr. Mendes. He can probably direct those questions to his uncle and his father and his brothers as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right. He knows exactly what his own family has done, the brutal suppression, the first ever violence used in this Aragalaya, and he had the audacity to say what he said.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahim Mendes, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right today is Shania Darigama, joining us for the first time on the show. And on to my immediate left is Jayamal Ratnayaka, no stranger to Face the Nation, has been on the show a couple of times. With Jayamal's permission, may I hand over the floor to Shania?
Right, yeah.
Right. So Shania, it's all yours.
Thank you. My question is directed to Ms. Bhavani Fonseca. Going back to what's happening at the UNHRC, many have contested the linkage between economic crimes and human rights on theoretical grounds, including Ali Sabri and his delegation in Geneva. What are your sentiments on those contestations and linking economic crimes to human rights?
So Shania, I think it's, as I said before, the fact that we're even having this conversation is an indictment of what's happening in Sri Lanka. The government, and not just this government, successive governments, and let's be very clear, Sri Lanka has been on the agenda of the Council for 10 years. 10 years. The first resolution was in 2012, and that was discussing what happened during the last stage of the war and violations linked to the war, looking at violations committed by both the government as well as non-state actors. 10 years after that first resolution, we are now back on the agenda of the Council with a new resolution that looks at not just what happened during the war years or the post-war years, but the economic crisis. Now, you're quite right in that this link is being challenged, contested, debated by different actors. But I think it also speaks to the crisis and the impunity. I think it's just the fact that impunity has thrived in Sri Lanka. There has been no accountability, no genuine accountability. And the last government has brought the Sri Lankan country and the citizens to an unprecedented crisis. That's captured in the High Commissioner's report. But not just the High Commissioner's report. I think even the IMF, the documents, the civil society documents, various actors have talked about the crisis, where people are not able to get 3 meals a day, where they're struggling to find medication. I mean, this is a crisis point. So the economic crisis is directly linked to particularly individuals who are in power, and I would say some who will continue to be in power. And there has to be accountability on that. So economic crimes cannot be just swept under the carpet because it's inconvenient for some in power at the present moment. Of course, the government will go and critique, contest, challenge all of that. But let's see what happens on Thursday, because I think the vote is going to be interesting to see. But if one looks at even the statements made in the last few weeks at the HRC by member states who have a vote, but I think the government was very, very determined to get others to speak to them. But those who spoke in defense of the government were also those countries who face very serious allegations in their own backyard. Russia, China, Pakistan, Ethiopia. So I think, you know, the government's whole kind of line of why are we talking about economic crimes? This is a human rights council. The High Commissioner has gone beyond her mandate. Those, I think, don't address the crux of the matter, which is the country is suffering, the citizens are suffering, the government is ultimately responsible, and they have not delivered. Come up with a plan, come up with an action plan at least to say this is what's going to happen. They haven't done that. So it's very convenient to say this is going beyond a mandate, this is new, this is targeting a country. But a responsible government should come up with a plan and say this is how we're going to address the needs of our people. This is what we're going to do. These are the credible domestic mechanisms, if any, that we're going to implement. They have not done any such thing. If anything, they have brought or tried to bring a high security zone under questionable circumstances. They are trying to bring this proposed Bureau of Rehabilitation. They have arrested 3 protesters under the PTA when the government themselves said we're not going to implement the PTA. So they are going back in their own words, own promises. So really, Sri Lanka is becoming a laughing stock, if not having become a laughing stock, and they're not really coming up with any plans. So the connection, I think, speaks to the present situation and a sad plight where the government is not coming up with anything to show they have a plan.
So, Ambika, if you look at the recent past, the Supreme Court granted an order staying any action regarding rehabilitation when the de-radicalization regulations issued under the Prevention of Terrorism Act were challenged in the Supreme Court. We saw this happening as well. So don't you think that the Bureau of Rehabilitation bill is contempt of the Supreme Court and by extension the judiciary?
That's a very good point, and also one I think that quite a few of us have been making, because the court did give a stay order. It said that the government is not supposed to take any action regarding rehabilitation until the matter is concluded in the Supreme Court. So despite that, what they have done is they never actually stopped. If you look at statements by the Commissioner General of Rehabilitation, even after the stay order was granted, there were interviews given where it was very clear that they were continuing it and they were publicly saying this despite the fact the order was given. Now they have brought about this bill, which clearly what it shows, and it's, in a way it's not surprising because this regime in particular has shown its contempt for the rule of law. Instead of protecting the rule of law, what they have done is they are the ones who've broken the law most often, and they abuse the law. So this definitely shows that they do not care what the Supreme Court
But what
says.
I don't understand is that, Ambika, we've seen over the years the Ranil Wickremesinghe administrations have always spoken against the militarization of issues in the country. If you look at matters like 2009 to 2015, we've seen the manner in which how when Ranil Wickremesinghe has been in the opposition, spoke against the Gotabaya Rajapaksa or the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration. But when you look at section 17 of the proposed act, it speaks about militarization outright. It speaks about the Army, Navy and the Air Force to exercise, perform and discharge the powers, duties and functions under this act.
Yeah. Well, I would like to correct you there in the sense of that I don't think the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration has spoken against militarization, because even during Yahapalana, they did absolutely nothing to demilitarize or demobilize. There was, in a way, I suppose, a pause. But the military...
But some effort was taken, isn't it?
No, well, now if you go to the north and the east, the military intelligence did not stop surveilling or harassing civil society, because when I was at the commission, we continued to receive reports. The land takeovers, when I would go to Mullaitivu during that time, they were still talking about the military taking over land, even in Trincomalee, the Navy. All that was ongoing also because it has become part of the system. It has become so entrenched and normalized that even if you take one person out of it, the system continues to function the same way. And of course, as you said, this in a way, right now what we have is the military is already involved in the rehabilitation of persons who have a drug dependency. But that is not formal, nor is it legal, because the rehabilitation centers come under the Bureau of Commissioner General of Rehabilitation, which is under the purview of the Ministry of Justice. So legally, you can't find the military anywhere, but practically it is the military that runs these centers. During COVID, they came out and they issued a denial that the military has nothing to do with it. We know that is not true. Also because on the 29th of June this year, a few months ago, there was a death. A man was killed at Kandakadu Rehabilitation Center, for which they've arrested several, not just army. I didn't realize there were also, there was Navy personnel as well. So all that is illegal. And there is a problem with accountability and there's a problem with transparency. What they're doing with this bill is they're legalizing, they're formalizing the military getting involved in all these different types of rehabilitation.
So Bhavani, I want to come back to the very contentious yet short-lived Gazette of High Security Zones. I was going through the Sunday Times yesterday and there was a very interesting article which said that at the time of signing that order, before taking wing to Japan and thereafter Indonesia, President Ranil Wickremesinghe was unaware that the AG had not been consulted on this particular gazette. And we know that the AG is instituted to provide expert legal advice to the government, to government corporations, statutory boards, etc. So most of you represent the legal fraternity here. Is this not straying away from due process, the rule of law? How can you expect the common citizen to adhere to any sort of law when those representing the legislature and even the highest echelons of politics
Executive
in this country cannot follow the rule of law?
I mean, what do you say? I was also very surprised and disturbed when I read that report in the media that the official institution to advise on legal matters was apparently kept out of the loop. And that raises the question that I raised before, is who is driving these decisions? Who is making those decisions? Who is drafting policy? And that's worrying because it seems to indicate it's a security apparatus that's driving it and completely disregarding an institution within the executive arm, which is the Attorney General's Department.
Yes.
Now, I suspect, and according to various media reports, the reason the Gazette was revoked was because it's hard to defend such a Gazette. It's completely ultra-virus because, as I mentioned before, it was issued under the Official Secrets Act. Official Secrets Act, I mean, again, a questionable law, but that provides for prohibiting places, not creating high security zones. So coming back to decision making, it just really highlights that proper procedures are not followed, proper procedures which we have even questioned before. I mean, the Attorney General seems to also approve other policies, regulations, laws that we have gone to court and challenged as well.
Yes.
So I'm not saying I will completely abide by the decision of the Attorney General, but you know, just the fact they were kept out of the loop is really alarming. And it raises the question as to what next? What other laws, regulations, gazettes could be issued? And are we going back to a period where the defense apparatus is going to drive these policies, and at what cost? Costs for human rights, civil liberties, but also economic dimension. I think there was a media report that also said the business community raised concerns as to what these implications are. Now, many of us who have challenged, questioned high security zones find this interesting that the business community now are getting very concerned because their interests could be affected by these so-called zones. But it just speaks to a lot of worrying developments in terms of policy direction as well as governance under this government.
Right. So, Dr. Mendis, I want to speak to you about the various philosophies and ideologies that are in play in politics at present. We know that the current President Ranil Wickremesinghe is hailed as the champion of the free market. He is firmly standing by neoliberalism. However, the government or the majority of people in parliament, the ideology, the bedrock of their ideology is socialism. They are center of left of center. So how do you believe that President Ranil Wickremesinghe can form a government and move forward when the very basic ideologies that they represent clash? How can a country move forward, especially at a time where we're at a crisis?
All what matters to him, as the record proves, is power at whatever cost. In order to remain in power, in order to gain power, grab power, well, there is absolutely nothing that will hinder him from doing what he is doing. Nothing matters more than how to establish the power that he has got. I would say, as I said, immorally, unethically, he should not be even in parliament. He is not even fit to be in parliament. After 1 year, he got himself appointed as a leader of the UNP to go there when he is not even in the national list. So he is a man prepared to do whatever that is possible, humanly possible, in order to retain, in order to sustain what he has already done. So it's nothing to do with ideology. It is crude desire, crude greed for power at whatever cost. And he always found shortcuts to power, not principled. Well, you said neoliberal. He projected himself as a champion of liberal democracy, but that was a myth. He has absolutely no respect for Westminster model of democracy or any other norms, benchmarks of the Commonwealth relating to democratic freedoms. He has proved that abundantly, beyond reasonable doubt, that this is a man who is prepared to do anything as he did with the help of 134 MPs of the opposing side, all what mattered was how to grab power. The crudest possible way.
Dr. Mendes, we saw in 2011 the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration bringing forth a regulation where those who enter universities need to undergo a 3-week training program in army camps, supposedly because they are only places that can accommodate all the entrants. So there was a lot of contention with regard to this practice that was introduced by the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration in 2011. Now, you were in the university system at that time, and you've been in the university system for many, many years. How do you think the students viewed this practice? Why I'm asking you this question, Dr. Mendes, because now we are talking about rehabilitating those who are involved in Aragala and so on and so forth. So do you think that at that time and now people would take this positively moving forward?
Take what positively?
Take this Bureau of Rehabilitation bill for positively.
Why should the people take this positively? Why should the university students, even you see, consider it?
Because we are well aware that majority of the students who were arrested, or majority of the people who were arrested during the Aragala were from universities. And we've seen this over the last few weeks. This is in the public domain. There is no secret about it.
The universities, the university students, the university academics have been consistently opposing militarization. The KDU bill was opposed last year. Even I was to be arrested together with Vasanta Mudalige and 14 others on the same charges, right? And we have consistently opposed all forms of intrusion, military tactics against university students. During the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime, we vehemently opposed the military-based training for university students, because all that soft skills training should be coming from the schools, not even in the university. And for the military to get involved in training of that nature, was absolutely unacceptable.
Right.
Any form of militarization in the university undermining university freedom, university student rights have been opposed.
Now, Mr. Jayasuriya, you speak about how accountability needs to be directed at individuals who have been responsible for economic crimes. This was also posed to Bhavani by Shania as well with regard to what action needs to be taken and so on and so forth. And then responding to this earlier on, you said there is a glimmer of hope. There is a glimmer of hope with regard to how things are moving about. There is a court case and so on and so forth. Let's look at the past, Mr. Jayasuriya. What is the status of the court case with regard to the bribe of $2 million accepted from the Airbus industry by a former Sri Lankan airline executive and his wife? Let's look at the bond scam for an example. Let's look at the inquiries to the Pandora Papers lying with the Bribery Commission of Sri Lanka. What has happened? Absolutely nothing. And you are saying that steps have been taken, there will be concrete action that would be unfolded in the next few weeks, and you are very optimistic, while the people who are watching this show are saying that they are pessimistic about the country's future. Accountability will not lie anywhere. This is going to be swept under the carpet. For those who think that, Mr. Jayasuriya, what do you have to say?
Can I say first that all what the lawyers, the legal profession can do is to take the horse to the water. You can't make it drink it. The legal profession can bring up these matters and then ring the alarm bells with those people who are entrusted with the duty to do what they have to do by law. If they don't take the steps that they ought to be taking, these matters that you just mentioned have been brought to the notice of the respective authorities. There is no flaw or there is no shortcoming of the law. The law is very much in force and then it can be made use of. But the people who are vested with that authority, if they do not exercise the law in taking steps to bring these matters to the fore and then also bring it to the justice system to the courts for initiating court cases and so on. That's a matter with those authorities. That's where it is wrong. That is why there was a constitutional council that was appointed. And now there is no more a constitutional council. So all the people who have been appointed to those respective posts, including the judges, have been appointed at the pleasure of the executive.
Look at what the Aragale wanted. Bring back our stolen money. That's what they said. That's what they demanded.
I'm 100% with what you are saying.
And in a situation like that, if the government is bringing forth a bill to repress them, to suppress their notions, to suppress what they have in mind, is that the way forward?
No, it's something more than what you say. What you say is that it is this particular bill that has been now brought and been debated in the Supreme Court is for the purpose of the Aragale people. No, it is not only the Aragale people, even the three of you can be taken in, because it also says any other group of persons who require rehabilitation. If somebody, some damn fool thinks that you should be taken up for rehabilitation, you can be taken in and then sent for rehabilitation. There is no interpretation clause anywhere in this act to say who is a person who requires rehabilitation, who is a combatant, who is a protester. It's not said anywhere in the interpretation clause. The two draconian clauses that I see in these two acts, one is the preamble itself, and then section 3, which incorporates the word any other group of persons who require rehabilitation, and then section 17. As you also pointed out a while ago, under section 17, it is required, the president is given the power to bring the army, navy or the air force to do what they think should be done. Under normal circumstances, it is under the public securities ordinance that can be incorporated and also promulgated, and then such an order made under the public securities ordinance should go through the parliament. Every month it should be tabled before the parliament. And you know, there are certain instances during the previous regime of Gotabaya Rajapaksa where emergency regulations were invoked, but before the expiry of 1 month, because they knew that they could not go through the parliament, they abandoned that. But here again, they are bringing what has to be brought through the parliament, they are putting it through another avenue so that they can do what they want to do without having going through even the legislature.
Mr. Jayasuriya, now this bill speaks about ex-combatants, and I presume they're talking about LTT combatants who have now enrolled society. There's no proper definition on this.
There's no definition.
But if you look at it, when you say ex-combatants, you could probably direct your attention at the LTTE combatants who have now been enrolled society. So my question to you is, Mr. Jayasuriya, so 13 years after the conflict had ended in Sri Lanka, do you still think that those LTT combatants or those ex-combatants have not been rehabilitated in the country?
This is absurd. This is totally absurd, and they know by bringing this kind of oppressive legislation that we are going to be the laughing stock before the international community. And we are going to pay the price on the 6th, I believe, because so many countries are now lined up to vote against Sri Lanka. What is the final resultant factor? We will not be taken into consideration by any country, any lending organization for the loans that we are expecting from around the world. We are going around with a begging bowl. We won't get that because of this current situation. That was said by the UN report, that has been said by the IMF report, that has been said by... You don't have to go far. The laws are being laughed at in Sri Lanka. When you bring this kind of high security zone gazette, which now they have revoked, but we challenge it before the revocation, and those cases are still pending, and those cases will be argued. And today some newspaper wrongly reported saying that those cases will have a natural death. No, that will not have a natural death. That has challenged the promulgation of the high security zones under the official secretary. Is a laughing stock. I don't know who is the idiot, I would say, who has advised the government
to bring in 225 members, Mr. Jayasuriya, if you want to direct.
No, it's not the 225 members who had advised the government to bring this legislature or the gazette. It has been, I heard that it has been brought by some service people, I think the Defence Secretary and somebody else.
And the Minister of Public Security.
Minister of Public Security, I don't know, it's absurd. But they must understand
Minister of
what they are
Public
doing,
Security is
the damage
a
that they
member
are
of
doing
the
to this country.
225.
In this kind of sort of pathetic situation that we are now placed in, the damage that they are doing further to this country, preventing any lending organization to look at Sri Lanka with a positive, with some amount of positivity, we are being pushed down and under.
Yeah.
So we don't need enemies anymore.
Yeah.
The so-called friends are worse than the enemies that we have.
Bhavani, we are talking about the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions for many years now. I'm a journalist. I've seen how I have seen the manner in which in 2009 UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon arrived in Sri Lanka, spoke to Mahinda Rajapaksa, issued a joint statement. In accordance to that joint statement, the UNHRC sessions began in 2010. Now we've seen this year in, year out. What action has the United Nations Human Rights Commission done or taken thus far? They only talk. 13 years and counting. If there was action taken by the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions against Sri Lanka or on Sri Lanka to ensure that accountability lies somewhere, with regard to the 2009 war, for an example, you spoke about it earlier on in the show as well, things would have been different. We are still talking about these sessions. For how long?
I mean, as I said, Sri Lanka has been before the council. Resolutions have been passed for 10 years. And those 10 years, every time the government goes and says, give us time, we are doing our best, we need your support. Every government, successive governments, this is not just one government. Mahinda Rajapaksa's government, the Palane government, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government, and now Ali Sabri is in Geneva, as reported in the media, saying the same thing. So it speaks to failures at different levels, but it speaks to failures of a government that is not genuine in terms of addressing concerns on the ground. Now, 2009, the joint communique you mentioned, the one that Mahinda Rajapaksa and the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon signed, specifically speaks about accountability, about addressing what happened in the past. Has there been any accountability? I keep going back to this question. We haven't seen anything that has held accountable those who are alleged with serious violations. And now we are seeing not just human rights violations, economic crimes. So it's successive governments that has really entrenched impunity in Sri Lanka. But it also speaks to a council that is looking at this situation and trying to see what more can be done. So the first resolution, just so that everyone is clear, spoke about the situation on the ground and urged the government to take action in Sri Lanka. 2012. 2013, a year after, the government went and said, give us more time. Then they came up with the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, the LLRC, saying this is our answer to accountability and reconciliation. Did it address the key concerns of the grievances of victims? No. But it addressed, it showed, highlighted human rights violations, from enforced disappearances to land grabs to militarization. That's all documented by a commission appointed by Mahinda Rajapaksa. So if anything, these commissions, and we've got successive commissions, what they have done is report, highlight, document violations on the ground. The resolution speaks to those domestic mechanisms, but say you need to go beyond this. And I think there's a misconception thinking the UN Human Rights Council can be a sanctioning body. It's not a sanctioning body. This is 47 members trying to engage with a country. With a country, if really interested, could do much more for their citizens. When the country specific fails their citizens,
Right.
they can only pass a resolution. So your question, why is this happening again? Why is there
Why
not
is it
enough?
happening again and again? We
Again
speak
and
about
again.
this,
But
we
then-
speak about votes, Sri Lanka is defeated at particular votes in question, and then we speak about this matter again next year, and the reviews are taken place, and then again Sri Lanka is being discussed, Sri Lanka comes on the agenda. We've seen this cycle
Yeah, but
happening.
Shamir, the international community can only do so much. It's up to the government, up to the citizens to take the next step. Now, I have to say, this year...
When you say citizens, what do you mean by that?
Citizens
because
of
the
Sri
government needs to,
Lanka.
yeah, how can they take action?
Well, for starters,
Yeah.
they did take action this year. And I know there are some who will contest it, but this year was remarkable in tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting and asking for change. That change, to some extent, happened where we had an unprecedented situation where the elected president with a large mandate had to flee the country and resign. And that change could have been utilized better by the elected representatives in introducing certain changes. Now we then have to look to elected representatives to bring the next step, which is not happening. So then you have more and more protests happening. And as a response to the more and more protests, you have repression happening. So it's unfortunate that the elected government is not heeding the calls of the people. And their response is issue a gazette, which is questionable, issue a bill, which is hugely questionable. Their response is the other way.
Right.
So I come back to the point of the international community can only do so much.
Yeah. So
it's up to the Sri Lankans to take the next step.
Right. Ambika, now, I know that you were engaged or you attended the Aragalaya when it was in full force. You were a bystander, you witnessed what was going on, you wrote about the Aragalaya on many platforms, many articles, so on and so forth. Do you think in any way that those individuals who were engaged in the Aragalaya need to be rehabilitated?
The simple answer, absolutely not. Because what they were doing is they were exercising their civic rights, their responsibilities, and for the first time you did see protests that were not organized by political parties or by trade unions that were, of course, the IUSF and the students played a key role in driving it. That cannot be discounted. But there were also people who came about, and as soon as Ranil Wickremesinghe was, made Prime Minister and thereafter elected president, is when you also saw many of the people who supported it, like the middle classes, they stopped protesting, and they were like, this is becoming an inconvenience. But you saw the students and civic activists still continuing the protest, and it's those people that the government is targeting.
What transpired subsequently, the peaceful protests somewhat turned violent. Don't you agree?
Well, there was violence that took place, but mass movements, if you see...
Don't you think those who were engaged in the violence need to be rehabilitated?
But firstly, have they arrested everyone who took place in the violence? First, they said that it was the people, IUSF, etc., who burnt the houses. But they have arrested people who burnt the houses, and it doesn't seem like they're part of their university students or IUSF people, because if they were, they would have shouted that from the rooftops. But that has not happened. So, and we find the identity of the people who engage in this violence. Many of them are locals, etc., and not really the people who they are targeting now. And they're targeting them now because they're a thorn in their sides. They're continuing to protest.
Let's talk about...
Shami, can I say something about the violence that you asked her about, right?
Yes, sir.
When and how did this violence take place? On the 9th of May, there was a meeting at Mahinda Rajapaksa's temple trees, and they came out and they destroyed that, what they call Maina Gogama, right? And they were armed with clubs and so on. And then they were walking from the temple trees that in front of the Gaul Road, they were walking towards Gaul Face. At Gaul Face, there was a barricade that was put up by the police, and who was in charge of that? Deshabandhu Tennakon, DIG, in charge of Colombo. Right? And he gave the assurance, nothing will happen, you will not be assaulted, there will be no attack on you. And he allowed and instigated that attack on those people who were waiting
Let's
without
talk
arms.
about, we
He
know
was
what
the
happened.
man.
We know what happened on the 9th of
He,
May.
no,
Yeah.
no, no,
we know what happened.
No, no, you don't know very much. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because they have orders that were given by the magistrate to arrest this man, Deshabandhu Tennakon.
Yeah.
He had not been arrested. IGP wanted him transferred out. He could not even be transferred out. He's still there sitting pretty. What is the meaning of the law in this country?
No, let's talk about all that momentarily on a different show, Mr. Jayasuriya, but I'm talking about the rehabilitation aspect of it. So what transpired after that? See, violence cannot be condoned at any cost. We saw the manner in which how houses of members of parliament were burnt. We saw the manner in which how individuals entered the president's house in Fort. We saw the manner in which how then Prime Minister, now President's house was burned. So we've seen all this happening. So there was also a little bit of violence that was involved in this entire process, isn't it, Ambika? Because I need to be the devil's advocate because we don't have a government representative here. I need to take the side of the government as well when posing questions. So my question is, if you look at in the eyes of the government, they might say our houses were burnt. Isn't that tantamount to violence?
Well, as I responded before, there were people who were arrested for some of these incidents of violence. And it turns out that they were not really protesters, but they were people who were part of, local people, etc. Now, the people that they have arrested, they don't seem to have evidence that they were actually involved in acts of violence. So that answers your question. So the government...
Even bystanders were arrested because...
Exactly. There were so many people, bystanders, who were arrested for no reason except the fact that they were... I know 3 boys, 2 17-year-olds and 1 who was 20-year-old, who were passing by, who wanted to take a video for their Instagram apparently, and they were arrested, they were roughed up, and thereafter, several weeks later, they were once again summoned to the police, to the CID, and they were produced before the magistrate the following day. So these people were not engaged in violence, so they seem to be not actually looking for those who are engaged in violence, but those who are exercising their civic right to hold the government accountable when many others have, stopped protesting, stopped speaking out.
But don't you think that those who were engaged in violence, at least a section of these protesters need to be rehabilitated? Don't you think?
Well, what do you mean by rehab? Firstly, let's identify them, let's find out what happened, let's see whether they actually do arrest them. That's the first point, right? They seem to have no trouble arresting the person who sat in the president's chair and who took 2 beer mugs and who stole the flag and who swam in the swimming pool. But for some reason, they can't seem to identify people and arrest people who have burnt down houses. Now, what's the problem there? There is clearly a problem there, right? The police efficiency and also political will. They're deliberately highlighting minor infractions, arresting and detaining people for that because they do want to crack down on the protests. The violence that happened, they're using it as an excuse to arrest these people and to show themselves as victims, when the real victims, in a sense, are the citizens. So no one is telling them, like, not to arrest the people who burnt down the houses, but have they? In many instances, still haven't.
If you take a look at the Mirihan incident, where everything transpired as far as the Aragale was concerned, even the individual who burnt the bus there
exactly. The police were standing by when that happened. Why did they stand by? Why did they not arrest? So it seems like the
all these are
police, the law and order mechanism is in cahoots with the politicians to create a certain narrative where they portray themselves as victims to absolve themselves of blame and use the law, or actually abuse the law, to crack down on those who want to hold them accountable. Simple as that.
So the government often use the threat of drug menace, Ambika, violent extremism to justify laws and policies, such as the issuing of the Section 12 of the PSO Gazette. This has been happening every month for the last 2 years, and a significant amount of money has been allocated for the defense budget as well in the country, despite the fact we were going through an economic crisis. Why do you think that they're doing this?
Well, one correction there is that the Section 12 of the PSO, it's not being used just now. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga used it. Thereafter, Mahinda Rajapaksa used it. Sirisena used it. Then Gotabaya Rajapaksa since the day he was elected, every single month he has been issuing it. So in a way, that is your subverting, or you're trying to avoid the process of parliamentary approval, which you need if you declare a state of emergency, whereas here you can just keep issuing the gazettes every month. It is because they want to use the threat, the supposed threat to national security, the supposed threat of the drug menace, to crack down on dissent and to bring about all these controls that restrict human rights, because bottom line, they don't respect the rule of law, they don't like to be held accountable, they don't like people dissenting. It's as simple as that.
So we've seen many issues with respective governments, Ambika. We've seen how the niqab matter came into practice as well, when there was a banning on the niqab in Sri Lanka as well. And then COVID-19 happened and everyone had to wear the masks, unfortunately. So then commemorating persons who died during the war as well. We've seen these matters being taken up year in, year out in the country as well. What do you think this says about the governments as far as national security is concerned in the country?
It shows that they target different groups at different times to make them like the bogeyman, or to say because of this we have to bring these repressive laws. So they're victimizing these groups, they're violating their rights, all to bring about abusive laws, or to declare states of emergency, to use Section 12 of the Public Security Ordinance, to say they have to rehabilitate people, to involve the military in law and order, because it's a government that does not respect the rule of law. It is an authoritarian government.
Right.
And we know that the former president, who was defense secretary, that is his nature. And
let's say, Ambika, hypothetically, that this bill in question is passed in Parliament with amendments. Let's say, gentlemen and the ladies, it is passed in Parliament. Do you think there is no chance this approach can be successful? Because in hindsight, it may be. Isn't it worth trying this entire process out?
what are the amendments that they're going to bring? Because if they keep compulsory rehabilitation...
No, I said if they bring in amendments and pass this bill.
What are the amendments?
Because they have a clear majority in Parliament as well.
It would depend on the amendments. If they keep compulsory rehabilitation in, it's not going to work. If they involve the military, it's not going to work. If they say that, the staff can use reasonable force to ensure that people follow orders, which is basically you're legalizing torture, right? It's not going to work. So basically, most of the provisions in this bill are very problematic and violate human rights. So if you're going to amend everything, that's kind of like an entirely new piece of legislation, which means just, take it off the books.
Dr. Menis, you've been a staunch supporter of the opposition as far as the status quo right now is concerned. You've spoken against the current government. You've spoken the need about having an election and getting a fresh mandate from the people with regard to what is going on. In a situation like this, where we're talking about human rights, where we're talking about the violation of the basic fundamental rights of individuals, what is the way forward? What must we do? Because Bhavani says the people have a responsibility as well. The people and the government have a responsibility as well. So what is the way forward?
Well, the way forward is a new mandate that the people should give. The people should be given the opportunity in the context of failed governance and a regime being ousted.
But Dr. Menis, we don't even have food to eat. Look at the malnutrition rate in Sri Lanka. It's alarming. And you are saying that let's all go for an election. Is it even possible?
Yes, the only way out with regard to social, economic, political, cultural, moral, all frontiers of life, solutions.
What is it that, tell me, what is it that the opposition would do differently?
Right, in the first place we have to accept that solutions
what is it that the opposition would do differently?
That lacks credibility.
Very simple. What is it that the opposition would do differently from what we are experiencing now?
Right. You see, now first we have to accept that, as I said, a government that lacks credibility, a president that has no mandate to rule, should not be continuing in this manner, making the Republic of Sri Lanka a mockery. among civilized nations. Now, if there is a fresh mandate, we are talking about elections, a fresh policy, it is up to the people. It's up to the people to elect the government they want. They don't want this government to continue, which has absolutely no credibility. And at the elections, the political parties will put forward their program of action. So what I'm trying to say is that there is absolutely no way of, you see, playing tricks with this process, short-term tricks in the way we have played and making everything a mockery. We need a fresh start, a fresh perspective, a new program, a policy, a new leadership, new actors. That's the only way out. A new ethos, the grand principle. What do we believe in? Do we believe in democracy or do we believe in authoritarianism? This is a regime that is passionately committed to continue with authoritarian fascist tactics. This should end. A new mandate should be given.
Ambika, I want to speak to you about the Aragalaya. In recent months, yes, there are certain factions that believe that the Aragalaya has not died down and it continues to move forward, but that mass uprising that we witnessed in early this year is somewhat subdued, has somewhat receded. However, the crises that brought the people onto the streets are still existent or worsened. For example, Sri Lanka is food insecure. We're facing another energy crisis if we fail to procure coal in the recent days. We are still going forward with the fuel quota system, which is the bare minimum as far as living standards are concerned. There's skyrocketing inflation. However, the government seems to be preoccupied trying to curtail the rights and liberties of the people. So do you believe that this is a preemptive measure? High security zones, the Bureau of Rehabilitation, these are all just preemptive measures to ensure that the people's freedom of expression will be curtailed. If another uprising or a revolt of this sort occurs, will we go back to something like Russia under Stalin or Germany under Hitler?
Well, one thing is very clear is that, this government, particularly the former president, I don't think he expected this because, he came with such an overwhelming mandate. He's an authoritarian. Everyone's frightened of him. So they were taken by surprise and they did not know how to react. And what we heard was there were people who were part of his party who felt that he just wasn't strong enough. He should have used the same kind of violence that President Ranil Wickremesinghe did soon after he was sworn in, on the 22nd of July. So clearly they believe, and we saw they had a internal meeting about what went wrong, and there were pictures of that.
Restructuring process.
Exactly. So in that also it seems they think the mistake they made was not crushing it brutally and not crushing it quickly enough. So I suppose because the president is probably learning not from his own mistakes in the past, but from the mistakes of the Pohotua, perhaps in not crushing it brutally, and also because he was elected by the Pohotua, their votes, right? And so perhaps he's also feels beholden to them, probably has to manage them. They are driving it. And this is definitely, and also when we have the IMF package coming in, we will see cuts, we will see certain austerity measures. So there definitely will be protests, and maybe like the protests that we have earlier, where, general public comes out to protest. So they want to clearly avoid that. And arresting certain people is also to create that fear, right? So people will think twice before speaking out. So definitely it's part of a tactic. They're learning from their mistakes and they're consolidating.
Ms. Bhavani, if I may ask you, just following up on what Shamir asked you as to what the role of the international organizations were in this whole process. Resolutions 30/1 issued in 2016 and 46/1 issued in 2021 were drawn up by the UNHRC to suggest that Sri Lanka work with external enmities like hybrid courts to promote accountability and reconciliation. This suggestion was sort of disregarded by Sabri and his delegation on the account that it was not pursuant to our constitution. What do you have to say about the role of the international organization when the response of our government is this?
Well, let's be very clear. 2015 resolution 30/1 was co-sponsored by the government of Sri Lanka. And that particular resolution has a mention of the involvement of foreign and Commonwealth judges in a justice mechanism. That resolution, when co-sponsored by Sri Lanka, the President and the Prime Minister, I assume, were on the same page, and the Prime Minister is now the President of Sri Lanka. So at that time, the then Prime Minister, who is now President, who is a lawyer, who knows his law very well, I think, agreed to this mechanism. They didn't see any constitutional bar at that time. And now for the government to say there is a constitutional bar raises a lot of questions. Did they realize something several years later, that there is a constitutional bar? And we have looked at this issue for several years, 7 years really, and there is no constitutional bar. There are procedural issues that will need to be done to ensure internationals can come and work in Sri Lanka. And there are also private members' bills that talk about foreign judges. I mean, I'm not even going into that. And that particular private members' bill was introduced by a particular member of this government. So they didn't see any problem having international involvement at those times. Now, we also need to ask the question, why was that language brought in with the government of the day agreeing to it? Was because the domestic mechanisms have failed. I mean, if anything that has come out of this panel, we have realized that there are no cases that have gone through the Sri Lankan justice system that has led to accountability. There are a handful, one including a massacre, but there was a pardon given by Gotabaya Rajapaksa for that particular case. So really justice has eluded the victims, and that's why that particular provision was brought in. There was also, and I want to be very clear, there was a consultation task force that went around Sri Lanka in 2016 and came out with a report, had consultations across Sri Lanka, in the south, in the north, in the east, in the west, where there was overwhelming support for a hybrid mechanism because there's no trust in the domestic the processes. So overall, there
So when you
is...
speak about, Bhavan, let me interrupt you there for a second. You speak about the efforts taken to go around the country, and this really clearly said that a hybrid solution is the way forward, right?
For the justice.
For the justice system.
Yeah.
What was the sample size?
There were 7,000 submissions made to the consultation task force.
So we're talking about 22 million people in the country, and we are talking about a sample size of 7,000.
Mm-hmm.
Not a reflection of what the sentiments of the people are.
You want to disregard the consultation task force, which I would say is problematic because that's a consultation. But continuous
7,000 people against 22 million, there seems to be a disparity.
Continuous commissions of inquiries appointed by successive governments have highlighted problems in the justice system, highlighted impunity in Sri Lanka. Now, if the domestic processes were working, why has no one been held accountable? Or in a case, one case, where accountability actually went through in the Miruswal massacre, why was that individual who was found guilty...
You hit the nail on the head.
No, Shamir, let me finish this.
Right.
Found guilty, Supreme Court affirmed the conviction,
Right.
and there was a pardon given. Now, in such a situation where justice eludes people, are you saying that we completely disregard the fact that there are failures,
Right.
which has led to the finding now that economic crimes are also a problem? Because why? Because there's impunity in Sri Lanka. if we continue to find excuses, if we continue to deny justice, we're going to go in the same cycle over and over again. So it's not an issue that we'll have to deal with now. It's an issue we'll have to deal with continuously.
So you hit the nail on the head.
May I just
Bhavani.
interrupt there for a second about, because I think lots of people will take this, so I want to correct this, is the sample size. Now, according to quantitative research methodology, the sample size to do a national survey is 1,300 for 22 million, right? So 7,000 in that is huge, because they use a certain method whereby they do a proper sampling according to region, sex, social strata, etc. So just to say that the 7,000 is actually massive.
Let's say 7,000 is massive.
Massive.
Yeah, okay, right, massive.
But
Okay.
moving on.
Right,
yes.
moving on. So you hit the nail on the head. You said the domestic mechanism has not worked. Has the international mechanism worked?
What international mechanism?
So
What is
right
the
now,
international
every year we go to the UNHRC sessions. Now on Thursday we are going to have a vote. What does it do?
Yeah, but Shamir, we are coming back to the same point. What can the Human Rights Council do? It's not a sanctioning body. This is not. I mean,
What
I
is
think
the
there
next
is a
step?
misconception.
Right. What is
here.
the next step? Okay, now we go back again. Let's on Thursday, hypothetical. Let's say we are defeated. Okay.
We
What
meaning
happens then?
The
government of Sri Lanka is defeated. So we as a nation, we are also responsible because we are also part and parcel of this 22 million people of the country. So when we speak about the government, this reflects us as well individually. So what will happen then?
Shamir, can I also be very clear?
Yeah.
I was in Geneva and I took a very different line to the government. So I'm not representing the government. The government is responsible to take action in Sri Lanka. But there were several of us who went and spoke, and we may be called traitors for speaking differently and having a different tune to the government.
You are entitled for your own opinion.
No, but I'm not responsible in terms of the line the government is taking. But the government is saying the same thing for the last 10 years that Sri Lanka has been before the council. That is, give us time, we will try our best, we'll look at domestic processes, nothing has worked. So the Human Rights Council can only work with the governments that's genuinely interested in doing something right in the country. What this resolution will do is further particular things that were started last year, including evidence gathering. Now, evidence gathering, that particular provision is what is contested by this government. Why? Because they are worried that the evidence gathering could lead to accountability. That could actually one day hold particular individuals accountable. So you may not see direct implications now, but it has started a process. And why is the government that is in such economic crisis rushing to Geneva? I mean, the foreign minister and the justice minister were there in September. According to media reports, the foreign minister is there now. A country that is facing a severe economic crisis, why are they rushing to defend their record? Because they know this has started a process. It may not bring sanctions right now, but there's international attention on Sri Lanka. And the international attention on economic crimes and human rights and impunity raises alarm bells across the globe.
So Bhavani, what I want to appraise the viewers who are watching the show tonight is the fact that the statement that was made by Minister Mahinda Samarsinghe when he was in charge of the human rights portfolio in the country. Now he is the ambassador to the United States of America as well. He spoke of a very important notion. He said, do not pelt stones by being inside glass houses. Now this is etched in my memory because this was a very significant statement and many individuals who witnessed this particular statement in question thought, oh, this is a true patriot speaking, because there are a lot of human rights violations made by the United States as well. Let's take a look at, for an example, the killing of Osama bin Laden, going to another country, a sovereign state, and killing an individual. He may be a terrorist or not, but entering a sovereign nation with their security forces and killing an individual does ring alarm bells. We saw the manner in which how in Afghanistan, in Iraq, how US soldiers have sprayed as far as civilians are concerned, just because they've been they've shot to the air to celebrate weddings. There have been drone attacks. We witnessed all this. Isn't this hypocrisy itself?
You asked the same question last year, Shamir, when we had this debate about 46/1.
I probably might ask you this question.
Same question
years to come, years to
next
come
year
as well.
too. And I think you have a point. You know, there are countries with questionable track record. But does that mean that you ignore violations that are happening across the world? Ongoing violations? I mean, there is also this debate, the government also has raised this, that 13 years after the war, why are we talking about what happened in the past? We have to look to the future. Sure, let's look to the future, but if you don't address the past, it's going to keep recurring.
So wounds that are left behind by the conflict has to heal.
And across the world, I am not defending any country here, but we are talking about Sri Lanka. We are talking about a country that continuously goes and makes promises, rhetoric, and doesn't deliver. And successive governments, I'm not just saying it's Ranil Wickremesinghe's government, successive governments. But it comes back to the point of individuals that are driving decision-making, policy remain. They are never held accountable. So this may be a process that's happening in Geneva, but that speaks to a very, very deep and fundamental problem in Sri Lanka, that is impunity and accountability.
Mr. Jayasuriya, you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to add something that is with regard to, you asked this question from Bhavani also. She also responded that this way with regard to what's happening about the domestic mechanism with regard to the justice system.
Right.
So if it has
We've seen many domestic mechanisms, Mr. Jayasuriya. Let's not forget about the lessons learned and reconciliation commission report, the LLRC report, for an example.
Then what is happening with regard to the international mechanism? Then you came to the question of the resolution that has been passed for the last 13 years that have been there, that comes and goes and comes and goes. But finally the question is, what can these international communities do for us in Sri Lanka? Bhavani quite well explained that they cannot take punitive action. They cannot take the action that a court of Sri Lanka can impose, either penalty or imprisonment or whatever. International community is different. Now take for instance the lending institution. We are at the moment going around with a begging bowl. Lending institutions can decide, okay, this is a country that has so much of human rights violations, that has so much of oppressive laws that have been imposed. They can decide. Take IMF. What have they said in the last report?
Now, Mr. Jayasuriya, let me interrupt you for a second here now. We are in a precarious situation, unfortunately or fortunately. See, when the country's debt restructuring was spoken of, everyone, economists, human rights activists, everyone said we need to go to the IMF and there will be some sort of confidence that are being built. And then we'll be able to get some money. People will lend as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. Even the Human Rights High Commissioner's report speaks about how important it is to engage with Sri Lanka and help Sri Lanka to get out of this mess at the moment. Now, Mr. Jayasuriya, you're saying our human rights track record is also important. Now, how many things to balance out, Mr. Jayasuriya? This is not an easy task.
That's the responsibility of the government to maintain the human rights record.
So do you think the government has that competency to do so?
Well, competence and the ability and the wanting to do so is another matter.
Right.
They may not have the will to do it. That you can't say no government has the competence in doing that. You have to have the will to do it. But and also you asked a question from, I think you asked that from Mahim. What if the opposition was in this place? What would they have done differently?
I asked Dr. Mendes.
Yes. You asked that question that I was itching for that answer, but I'll give that answer now. If any opposition party coming into power at this moment of time, the first thing, the foremost thing, first and the second and the third preference should be put our economy right. In putting our economy right, what have we got to do? We have to create we are facing a problem on the dollar reserves that we had, which are now depleted. We had 7.5 billion at the end of 2019. Now we are having zero. As Ali Sabri informed the Parliament on the 5th of May, we don't have even $5 million, and that is how we don't have money even to import the medicine that are required for the pregnant mothers and so on and so forth. So, having faced that situation, we have to earn the dollars. To get the dollars, nothing can happen other than to bring in investments into this country. To bring in investments into this country, you must create an atmosphere giving confidence to the investors that their money is parked in Sri Lanka will be safe, and they are able to carry on with their investment.
Jayasuriya, let's be a little bit practical here. Now, you're not only the former chairman of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, president of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, you are also the former chairman of the BOI of Sri Lanka as well. You are also the former chairman of the BOI.
I'm saying this.
So when you were the former chairman of the BOI, Mr. Jayasuriya, you came on this show and said there is a lot of red tape.
Yes.
And that is what you're trying to figure out. Now you're saying investors will come to the country.
That's what I'm saying. We have to put the BOI law into place. We have a toothless lion called the BOI law. That has to be amended after 42 years in existence. That has not been done, and President Wickremesinghe should be better aware of this, because he is the one who brought in the Biagama zone, which is a successful thing. But if he did it then, why can't he do it now? So I don't know whether his mind is being attracted by so many other issues. I don't know who is advising him. The problem is, as it was said earlier also, the people who are advising are the same people who advise Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Very easy, no, Mr. Jayasuriya, to say my advisors had told me this, but the owners had to somewhere stop somewhere, no, Mr. Jayasuriya.
That's the problem.
So who's going
he
to
has
take
to find who his advisors should be.
Why are they testing and trying the Sri Lanka citizens again and again?
So we have to create that situation that would be conducive for the investors coming to this country and then park their dollars and then start some business and then go on with it.
Right. Let's talk about the rehabilitation bill. If you talk about the government and its conduct, Mr. Jayasuriya, tonight is not going to be enough. We'll have to probably have this on a weekly basis, 24 hours a day, and talk about the problems faced by the government 365 days of the year, unfortunately. So let's talk about this particular bill in question that has been brought forward now. Now that is a matter of contention at this very moment of time, Mr. Jayasuriya. So if you look at this particular bill in question, now you spoke about how the Army, Navy, and the Air Force are told to exercise their power in terms of the rehabilitation centers that have been built. And this has been very clearly articulated on section 17 of the particular bill in question. Now we saw, as Ambika correctly pointed out before, 2022 June, a death took place at the Kandakadu Drug Rehabilitation Center as well, for which 4 members of the security forces were arrested by the police. So if allegations of torture do arise at rehabilitation centers, the police will still have the power to arrest individuals who are committing those crimes in question, isn't it? So this is a way forward as far as the government is concerned, don't you think so?
The Indian constitutional maker Professor Ambeka said that.
Not this Ambika, right?
I wish it was. That the best of constitutions, but if used by an autocratic ruler or a dictator, cannot be put to better use. But even the worst of constitution, if used by a benevolent leader, can be put to better use. But so much so, the laws are there. Laws that can be, whatever is there in force, can be, if used in the proper management for the proper purpose and the objective, it can be used for a better purpose. If it is for the purpose of rehabilitating the drug users or the real kind of terrorists in Sri Lanka, if there are any more at the moment, I know that I don't think for a moment that LTT has been now crushed long years back. There was no point talking about the LTT anymore. We have to talk about our own selves. Now they are trying to focus that same attention to the other communities. But unfortunately, as this has been said even earlier, but when that was been focused at the LTT competence or the Tamil community, nobody in the south spoke about it. Now that it is being focused on the people in the south, firstly the Muslims and now the Sinhalese, then only the south is also starting to talk about it. We are not against it in any manner if the laws are properly used for the objectivity of the laws, whatever is required to suppress the criminals and the serial killers or whatever. But the problem here is the serial killers, even once they are convicted by process of law, they have been discharged and then given pardons. The people, and also the kind of the incident that you just mentioned, $2 million taken bribe. It was complained about 5 years ago. Nothing has happened. Not known what happened. This Greek bonds matter. Greek bonds matter. That was complained to the Bribery Commission Department in 2012. Has taken 10 years. 10 years. We still don't know what has happened. So there are so many cases like that. The worst of corruption cases are not being inquired into. The laws are there, the Attorney General is, I don't know what he's doing, and sometimes the law acts fast and steady with regard to the political opponents. Now, in the case of Rajitha Senratne, with regard to when he was granted bail, he was, that particular order was appealed and then went to the High Court to turn down the bail and to put him back in the cell. But with regard to a minister whose trial was conducted for more than 50 odd days, after trial he was convicted for asking for a bribe or extortion of more than 25 million rupees, and he was given a suspended sentence, but there was no appeal. So this is the situation, is the people who are vested with the law, the power, the prerogative to use the law for the correct objectivity are not being used in that direction.
Right.
So there is
let me ask.
huge hiatus in that.
Right. So let me ask the four of you a question with regard to rehabilitation and so on and so forth. The discussions that we've been having today on Face the Nation. What is the right approach towards rehabilitation? What must the government do? Let's start off with Mr. Jayasuriya.
Well, if you are talking about, as I said earlier, to rehabilitate the drug, there are drug addicts, but the present laws are there. Now, take for instance, there was something that was said by, I think, Ms. Damita Abhiratna actress, and the prison commissioner came out and said, this is how we rehabilitate the prisoners. And they said that so many people have been made to sit the Bauddhachara Vibhagya of the Dham Pasal, and they have got through and so on and so forth. So under the normal system, there is the rehabilitation process going on. Why should we have a separate mechanism for so-called rehabilitation? Why can't we go through the same process? So that they can come out as better citizens. I don't deny for a moment there are instances where people have to be rehabilitated. But what is a prison meant to do? Prisons are meant to rehabilitate people.
Now, with the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, you can't even go to the prison, no, Mr. Jayasuriya. They kill the prisoners, no. The Bangalore prison report, remember?
Then what happened to the killers? They all they are still at large. They are still at large.
Who are the killers?
The killers are the people who are in charge of the prison and the people who came from outside.
There was a prison report that was issued as well, no? And no action has been taken.
No action has been taken.
So that is why people are asking questions with regard to accountability. You are very optimistic about accountability, but that's not the case.
Hundreds of cases where politicians are involved, where politically sensitive cases, these are either murders or looting or robbery or misappropriation or cheating. But today, the police, the CID, they are not pursuing any one of these cases. Why? They are busy with the Aragale boys. They are busy with them. Somebody who was supposed to be there watching whatever was happening at either the temple trees or taking a bath at the president's house in Colombo or near Mr. Vikramasinghe's house. We are all very sad about what happened to Mr. Vikramasinghe's house. There are no two words about it. I was shocked. I was devastated to hear that. That should never happen to not only a Prime Minister, that should not happen to anybody.
Anyone.
Not to you or me.
Violence should not be condoned at any cost.
Cannot be condoned at all. But take the real culprits. There were hundreds of people who were watching that. The police personnel were there. They were armed. Why couldn't they catch them at that moment? Why are they going from house to house and then trying to look at these people? They were all there. All that they managed to do was get all about 4 or 5 photojournalists and then the TV crew from your channel. They assaulted them mercilessly. That's what they did. That's not what they were supposed to do. So the laws are there enough and sufficient to deal with such people for rehabilitation, if there are people who have to rehabilitate. The prisons are meant for that. We are not using that process. We are trying to create a different apparatus. We are trying to create another body to decide who should be sent for rehabilitation. That is totally out of the parallel situation from the legal process. The courts have to take the decision, not some body to be appointed in an administrative manner by the minister or somebody.
You're saying the prisons have to take this matter up and ensure that the rehabilitation happens from that aspect.
That is what the prisons are meant for.
Yeah.
That is what the prisons are meant for.
But do you think it serves its purpose, Mr. Jayasuriya?
The problem is the prisons are being used for some other purpose.
Based on the accounts a lot of people have said about the internal workings of prisons, I think it's far from rehabilitation, isn't it?
Definitely so. But from the figures that was said by the spokesman of the, I think some prisons commissioner came and said that so many people have been, they have been attending Dham Pasal and all that. But of course, the person, if he has a will to do whatever, some education or take Mr. Ranjan Ramanak, actor. He has been going through, with all the difficulties that he had to face, with all the torture and the shortcoming that he was made to face. Still, he had gone through a process of education also. That was commendable and admirable.
Yeah, after Anjan Ramanayak was released, there was a statement that was issued by the prison's spokesperson saying about the meals given at the prisons department. Is it true, Ambika? Now, you've done a prison report as well. I just want to drag your attention to this statement that was made. On Sundays, yellow rice, a piece of chicken, potatoes. Now, given the fact that the country is facing this crisis, probably people would be better off being inside the prison.
That kind of food items must be brought to the prison. But whether those food items are given to the prisoners is another matter.
Actually, they're not. Yes, as someone who was in and out of prison for 5 years, when I was at the commission, the commission did a prison report, 863 pages of it. And what we saw is that, the prisons are meant to be centers of rehabilitation, but they are not. Most of the people in prison are there because they are poor. So it's criminalization of poverty. More than 60% of people are there because they cannot pay fines as little as 3,000 rupees. It is a violent environment. And sending people, and also because there are many people who are there who have been remanded because they have not been granted bail or they cannot post bail. And bail is supposed to be the norm, but it has become the exception. So we found a large number of people. Sending people to prison really doesn't rehabilitate them. What it does is that it criminalizes them. And in terms of the food, what we saw was that it was quite dismal. And the complaints, and we ourselves saw the food that was being served there, and it was substandard. There are allegations of corruption, etc., all that, because the prison department is no different to any other department. So in terms of rehabilitation, I think, if you're talking about persons who have a drug dependency, compulsory rehabilitation does not work. We can say whatever we want, evidence proves us otherwise. And if you talk to medical personnel, they will tell you the same. So the law that we have now is it is in contravention of international human rights standards. Violent extremism, what does that mean? Right? If you want to arrest someone and try them for an offense, there are laws for that. What does even violent extremism mean? And the problem with all these forms of rehabilitation is that rehabilitation is supposed to be at the end of a trial, after you are found guilty. All these processes of rehabilitation, you are not charged, you do not go through a trial, you are not found guilty. The executive is the one who does it. Right. That is why it is very problematic.
Right. So my question that I posed to Mr. Jayasuriya, is there such a thing called the right approach as far as rehabilitation is concerned, Bhavani?
I think Ambika has answered that question. But can I just say, we are dealing with a bill right now which is before court, but the first thing when you say what's the right approach is to withdraw that bill. That would be the first approach, because I think we all agree it's a problematic bill and a process that that's extremely questionable. The other one is, why is it that we keep looking to the military in terms of the end all for all our answers? The militarization in this is problematic. The vague definitions are problematic. The fact that the minister has such broad powers is problematic. But we also haven't talked about one dimension. That is a secrecy clause. Right. There is a secrecy clause here that is contrary to the right to information provision now, which is in the Constitution. So a secrecy clause could also lead to more abuse. People won't be able to speak about it. People won't be able to ask about it because there's a secrecy clause. There's a declaration members would have to sign on to. So there are very specific provisions that are problematic. So we draw the bill. If the government is genuine in rehabilitation, then have the conversation, what is rehabilitation, what is best suited for Sri Lanka, what are the best practices that one can look to. The problems in our system, I think, are documented, are discussed. This is not a new issue. So why do we keep going back to repeating the same mistakes we keep repeating? There is no genuine interest in this government or successive governments to really get their house in order. So we keep going back to why then is the international community looking to us saying, get your house in order. We keep repeating the same mistakes. So in terms of rehabilitation, start with withdrawing the bill, but then have this conversation, what does it mean? Why are you using the same problematic processes and practices that have been there for so many years that haven't been addressed? Why is it that we have to go back to this punitive practice, you know, the criminalization, the fact that put them in prison, that's going to solve the problem. That's not going to solve the problem. So it's a conversation that society also has to have. I think we also make, and as a lawyer I'll say this, we look to the laws to address problems that society needs to address, society needs to confront. It's a bigger question than trying to bring things through a law and set up and establish a structure.
Dr. Mendes, what are your thoughts? Is there anything called the right approach as far as rehabilitation is concerned?
Very clearly, it is seen that rehabilitation is a modern methodology in the modern prison system. Just for information, I did my master's in Her Majesty's Prison Garth in Lancashire, Preston, 33 years ago, on rehabilitation of prisoners. Now that happened to be an honorable way out in search of humane care. How to help prisoners to relate to society and society to relate in an honorable manner to the prisoners. The British Open University had a very, very significant role to play in rehabilitation of prisoners. Life prisoners, doing postgraduate degrees finally, after completing the undergraduate studies, right? And also the industry working in the prisons, industrial workshops, and people interested in sports, given gym facilities, and so many things were happening. Libraries were put up. There are different categories of prisons in UK. Category A, high surveillance, monitoring and control. Category B, modern rehabilitation methodologies. So there are many lessons that we can learn if we really want to rehabilitate prisoners. And here we are talking about a group of people who have utter contempt for mankind, running prisons in a most dishonorable manner, you see, as we understand through these reports and so many other accounts of the people who went and coming back. Ranjan Ramanayak MP was our student in the Open University, Department of Social Studies, where I am working. And he is a first year, he completed his foundation studies in social sciences and is in the first year, completed the first year undergraduate studies in bachelor's in youth policy studies through the Open University. The enormous difficulties that he had to face in getting matters sorted out, well, unbelievable, unthinkable. We had to intervene in every single way in order to make the authorities respond in a meaningful manner, in a reasonable manner. So what I'm saying is, rehabilitation is an honorable methodology used in the modern world, in the modern prison system.
Very quickly, Dr. Mendes, before I go to the final round on tonight's show, I want to drag your attention to the 88-89 JP revolt, which resulted in the Butler and the detention center coming up as well, and the political authority that was accused of running the detention center was none other than the current president of the country, Ranil Wickremesinghe. So if you look at what's happening now and what happened back then, is there a parallel that you could draw?
That is why I say that the people, we need to be very careful about the type of people, the type of regimes that believe in this methodology right now, because they have absolutely no credibility.
Right.
They have, they themselves need rehabilitation. It looks like they are disturbed persons. They need help, maybe psychiatric help. some spiritual help.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Beastly minds, you see, cannot be talking about
Thank you very much.
rehabilitation
Right.
of any sort.
Right. So we are in conversation today with Mr. Puljaya Surya, President's Counsel, Bhavani Fonseca, Attorney at Law, Ambika Satguranathan, former Commissioner of the HRCSL in the country, and also Dr. Mahim Mendes, Senior Lecturer of the Open University of Sri Lanka. Discussion is revolving around the country's human rights track record and the Bureau of Rehabilitation Bill. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We'll be back right after this short commercial break, and let's discuss about what the way forward is for Sri Lanka as far as rehabilitation is concerned. All that and more after this short commercial break. Stick around, we will be right back.
අපිට උනේ ගෞරවනීයත්වයේ නැතිවීමද එහෙම නැත්නම් අපිට බැරි හින්දා තවත් කෙනෙක් අපිව පාලනය කරනවා.
ඇල්ජීරියාවෙන් ප්‍රංශකාරයෝ ගියාට වැඩක් නැහැ කියලා. මොකද හේතුව ප්‍රංශ සංස්කෘතිය, ප්‍රංශ දේශපාලනය තනිකරම තියෙන්නේ කියලානේ ඇල්ජීරියාවේ.
අපිටත් උනේ
ඒකම.
දැන් මේ ලෝක බෙදලා ඉවර දෙකට. ඒ දෙකට කියන්නේ මේ යුක්‍රේනය හා රුසියාවත් එක්ක තමයි බෙදලා තියෙන්නේ. යුක්‍රේනය ආක්‍රමණිකයා.
හැබැයි ඔය නැවතත් කියනවා මේක යුක්‍රේනය හා රුසියාවද ප්‍රශ්නේ නෙමෙයි.
ඒක තමයි ප්‍රශ්නේ පේන්නේ විදිහ. ප්‍රශ්නේ ස්වරූපය එකයි. ප්‍රශ්නේ මූලයන් තියෙන වෙන තැන.
සම්පත් තියෙනවා. ඔව් අපිට ඉස්සරහට
යන්න බෑ. හරියට හරි. ජාත්‍යන්තර වෙළඳපොළ ටාගට් කරනවා නම් එතන තියෙන්නේ gain of trade. භාණ්ඩයක් හරි සයවාවක් හරි විකුණලා ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් වාසිය ඉහළ වෙන්න ඕන.
මම ඉතින් දේශපාලනඥයෙකුත් නෙවෙයි ආර්ථික විද්‍යාඥයෙකුත් නෙවෙයි.
හැබැයි දේශපාලනඥයෝ හොඳින් දන්නවා.
දේශපාලනඥයෝ
වැඩ කරේ කොහොමද කියලා.
හුඟක් හොඳට දන්නවා. ජනාධිපතිවරු 7 දිනත් එක්කම වැඩ කරපු එකම මිනිස්සයා මම හිතන්නේ රාජ්‍යස්ත්‍රී හිටපු.
We must be prepared to face any challenge.
There is no quick fix, but we have to go for a solid fix.
Where do you think the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is heading right now?
Coming out of the ashes, like a phoenix, we will rise. People are fighting for daily survival.
We have to restructure our debt, there is no doubt about it.
I rather try at my best, sitting with the enemy, trying to sort this out.
IMF is not the destination.
We've heard a lot of political parties over the years over-promising and under-delivering.
Face the Nation every Monday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We start off the final round with Dr. Mahim Mendes, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. What is the way forward, Dr. Mendes?
Well, we need to do some honest searching of our own hearts, soul searching, and we see that we have deliberately, willfully undermined systems, institutions, methodologies, in the way that we have undermined the democratic process and the democratic institutions. Well, with the 20th Amendment, it became even more acute. Well, we need a fresh outlook. We need a new ethos. What do we stand for? The grand principles that we stand for. We need to revisit all this, and we cannot have a regime which hasn't got a grand ethos of the way forward, which I believe is democratic way of life for the people and democratic institutions for the people with dignity in public office, social responsibility, public accountability, dignity of people, dignity of institutions. So a fresh start is needed once again. It's like we're talking about an unflushed toilet. The problem in our society is a breakdown of social institutions. And these institutions have to be restored. Certainly not with people who lack credibility, who have made a mockery and become a curse to the Sri Lankan nation. The way forward is a fresh mandate through democratic elections, soon as possible. That is what the Aragale wanted. That's what the decent people want.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahim Mendes, Senior Lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Ambika Satkaranathan, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka.
Well, I would say the Bureau of Rehabilitation Bill is an example of how when any community or any group is being oppressed, we need to pay attention and we need to raise our voices, because something that happened 12 years ago to people in the north is happening now. Then it's something that happened 9 years ago to people who had a drug dependency or people who were sent to compulsory rehab is happening now to protesters. So that is what it shows, one of the things it shows. And the others is that the state structures are abusive, that they are violent, and that the Rajapaksa regime have a plan, as it were, because even if you see, as I said, these things are all part of a continuum. They are not new. So what it also shows is that many of our state institutions' independence has eroded, made worse by the 20th Amendment. And where the bill itself is concerned, it is something that needs to be withdrawn, because what it will do, it will exacerbate the problems rather than solve them. It will marginalize and discriminate against people, and it will create more space for discontent, more space for protest, and victimize certain communities, lead to their discrimination. So I would say the bill definitely has to be withdrawn. If we are talking about drug dependency, we need a health and human rights-based approach. There are international guidelines, international standard help that we can get. And also I would like to point out the government actually knows this, because the UN has repeatedly said this to them. The UN ODC as well as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So what they're doing now is not because they don't know, but because they do not care and they have no respect for the rule of law.
Right, thank you very much, Ambika, for your thoughts. In the final round, I now move my attention to Attorney at Law Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Center for Policy Alternatives.
So Shamir, one of the things that we discuss is the fact that Sri Lanka is coming before the Human Rights Council this week. We also forgot that, or we didn't talk about it, that Sri Lanka is going to have a debate on the 22nd Amendment in Parliament on Thursday and Friday. That bill, I think, is very important in terms of it is attempting to bring checks and balances, but really doesn't address the concerns raised by so many citizens. And I come back to this moment this year in Sri Lanka where people came out in thousands and asked for change, a system change, a change in political culture, a change in governance, a change in terms of the structures. So that is including abolishing the executive presidency. Now, the responses of this government, from the 22nd Amendment to the high security zones, to the present bill on rehabilitation, to various restriction but also repression, is completely contrary to what the people have asked for, people have demanded for. So we're going back to a situation where people are not going to trust the government or the structures, the governance system in Sri Lanka. So we are heading in a very dangerous situation, a very dangerous direction. So it's incumbent on the government but also the opposition. And I would like to see also the opposition take a more robust role here in speaking to what the people have articulated this year and over the years. These are not new issues. So it's very easy to, in a way, blame the government, but I think 225 members of parliament have a chance this Thursday and Friday to really speak to what the people have articulated this year. So it's really looking at what's happening in Sri Lanka, what's happening internationally, and really recognizing we are in such a dire situation. There is no time for excuses. Address the concerns of the people. Don't just have the blame game, which is very easy to do, but step up ASAP and ensure that we head in the right direction, and there's so much to do.
Thank you very much, Bhavani, for your thoughts as well. Last but not all the least, Mr. Pul Jayasuriya, President's Council, former President of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, not forgetting Mr. Jayasuriya, former Chairman of the BOI as well.
If you refer to me as just a lawyer, that's more than enough. Anyway, I think Bhavani would have had some telepathy about what I was going to say about the 22nd Amendment. I was going to talk about the same thing in a different form, but the 19th Amendment. 19th Amendment, has a lot of good features, but except one or two things have to be adopted from the 20th Amendment as much. That is like, for instance, the power of dissolution should remain with the president after 2.5 years so that he can go for election at least by next year. Then what the Aragalaya people and what the country wanted, what was promised by Mr. Rajapaksa to the people, system change never took place. But the Aragalaya kept on reminding the governance, the government and the people, the rulers, that we want what you promised. The accountability, the checks and balances and the transparency, that is what the people of this country have been crying for. But the best the feature of the 19th Amendment was the Constitutional Council and the independent commissions. The independent commission that should be expanded even to include some of the parliamentary committees. Look at the parliamentary committees that have been appointed today. I saw the names of those people. They don't deserve to be not only to be in such committees, they don't deserve to be in the parliament, they only deserve to be in jail. Those people who belong better in jail are now in committees deciding on the fate of the other people and the economy or the judiciary and everything in this country, or the economic structure like the COPE committee and so on. The person like Dr. Charith Herath, who was doing human service, has been taken out. So this has to change. This has to change. The Audit Commission, so many other commissions, the Private Commission, several I think the Procurement Commission, all that have been taken away, that should be brought back. It is only with such changes that we can convince the people, we can convince not only the local community but also the international community that we mean business. We mean business. Send a couple of ministers who have robbed the coffers of this government, the coffers of the people. Send them to jail. Why are they reluctant? Why are they falling shy about it? Those who have taken bribes, they must not be ruling us. They must be ruled. They must be in the place where they belong. The prisons, the judicial system, if we always keep on saying rhetorically that we are independent. Of course we are independent, but that's not enough. The cases should be initiated and brought before court. The judges and the legal system cannot draw cases and then prosecute themselves. The institutions that are there, the Attorney General's Department, the Private Commission's Department, there are several, maybe the police, they have to do what they have to do. If they only take dictates from the politicians as to what case to be prosecuted, whom to be prosecuted, whom not to be prosecuted, then we are not talking about a system. We are only talking about somebody's law, not the law that should be applied in the country. So if we are to have that kind of system change, have these institutions made stronger, the people who are going to be sitting in these institutions should be independent, people of high caliber, people of high standing and acceptability.
Right.
They are the people with integrity, they must be brought in. If not, we cannot think of any better future. We cannot give any semblance of confidence to those in the Aragalaya, to those in the country, to the young people, the younger generation. They'll be doomed. So you can't prevent them from going to the passport office, looking for jobs, whether they get a job or not, buy a ticket, go there and then end up on the road begging. If we are to make this change, first thing is bring the 19th Amendment with the necessary amendments and install the commissions and the Constitutional Council.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Pul Jayasuriya, former president of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Earlier on, Mr. Jayasuriya said that you're optimistic that things would work out. Let's wait and see how words are transformed into action and decisions are taken accordingly, and those who are responsible for the economic crimes in the country are held accountable as far as our Sri Lankans are concerned. Bhavani spoke about don't ask the same question every year. This is a question that has been lingering as far as the country is concerned. I probably may be asking you this question even next year when you come on the show, because as far as we find a permanent solution to the problem faced by the people, these questions will still be on the mindset of the people. Ambika, let's hope and pray that the bill is completely withdrawn and we'll have some light at the end of the tunnel. Dr. Mendy spoke about having a fresh mandate as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. Let's first of all try to figure out whether we can put something right in front of our plates to consume, because at the end of the day, Sri Lankans are now suffering with dire economic straits at the moment. So with that, I leave you tonight with the quote as I always do. We were in conversation with Mr. Pul Jayasuriya, President's Council, Bhavani Fonseca, attorney at law, Ambika Satkuranathan, former commissioner of the HRCSL, Dr. Mahim Mendes, senior lecturer, Open University of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and the two ladies for joining us this evening on the show. Thank you very much, Shania, and thanks a lot, Jayamal, for joining us on Face the Nation. I hope you enjoyed the show, Shania, today, being the debutant on Face the Nation tonight. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. It means a great deal to those who are oppressed to know that they are not alone. Never let anyone tell you that what you are doing is insignificant. Take care and good night.